Hello and welcome to Beyond Dope. I've wanted to do this podcast for a long time, and I'm not sure how many of these things we're going to get done, but we're going to go ahead and kick off episode 1. I wanted to start with the serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Okay, so I'm going to be your host, storyteller, and podcast chancellor for this little journey that we're going to take. My name's Johnny. I have been to detox 3 times and rehab another 3 times. The last time it stuck, and I currently have 5 years sober by the grace of my higher power. How this podcast came to be. Okay, so my counselor from actually a few rehabs ago reached out to me about just my story. She had heard a podcast that was that she really liked. It was a storytelling podcast, and she always loved my story and my insights and just how I got to where I am today. And she said, you have to start a podcast. And initially I thought that we were going to do it together, but it kind of just became her saying, hey, I will review what you got, send me what you got, I'll help you do the editing, I'll help you with anything you need. Maybe I'll be a guest on it a few times, but this is something that you need to do to kind of complete part of your journey. I've never done anything like this before, but what we decided on the format's going to be kind of like storytelling, me sharing my story, possibly some group meetings, maybe some questions and comments, or if any of you have any questions or comments, please send them to beyonddopepodcast@gmail.com. I wanted to talk about a few things before we get started with everything. What causes and leads to addiction? Because I was a normal kid, and I know sometimes this isn't the case. Something happens to you really young, maybe. But most of the people that I talk to, most of my friends, we were all normal kids growing up in the middle class in Garfield Heights, Ohio. And it wasn't just one thing that led us down this path. For me, especially, speaking from my experience, it was a lot of different things that kind of came together to, lead me down this, 15-year drug journey that I was on. I guess most people call it, trauma, but really, I was young and I had some deaths early in my life that started me down a pretty dark path. But like I said, it wasn't just that. We all deal with death at different times in our lives, but I think for me, dealing with it when I was really young and impressionable had a key role on my addiction. I hid my emotions, my grief in every substance I could find. First alcohol, then pot and pills, and eventually heroin. My problems got worse, just kept needing more, and I was unfortunate enough to make pretty good money, during my addicted years. I had my hand in everything back then, but we'll get to that later. I also wanted to just spend a couple minutes here on just the effects, of actually finally getting sober and figuring out what you like to do again. And I mean, all these little developmental things that, we didn't really progress into adults like normal people. We're just doing that now, where everybody was kind of finding their career path, years ago. Where when you spend 15 years in addiction and only one thing matters, so when you finally get sober, you're really trying to figure everything out again. You're trying to figure what do normal people do for fun? What do normal people, talk about? And I use that word normal because nobody's normal, but I mean, it's it's just what you say, I guess. um, but these were huge problems, that I sometimes still deal with. I mean, I love to read, I love to play guitar, I love to do pretty much anything with my kids. But other than that, who am I? What do I like to do for fun? Okay, so a little bit about myself. I grew up in Garfield Heights, Ohio. Um, my father would say that we were middle class, but I remember us being pretty poor. I had three brothers and a sister in what was, a very loving, normal household. I had dreams and goals. I was a normal kid. I didn't really feel one way or the other about, drugs when I was younger. I didn't really know what drugs were. But my brother Eric smoked cigarettes and marijuana. And to me, smoking cigarettes was just disgusting. I remember being 13 or 14 years old, seeing some girls I knew smoking cigarettes after school. I think it was like seventh grade. I was that kid that would tell them, how gross it was, and how smoking can kill you, and do you think that makes you cool, and all that shit, and basically to try to peer pressure you into not smoking. Um, how does that kid end up being addicted to drugs for the better part of 20 years? Like most boys, I looked up to my brother Eric most of all. Um, I was mostly a third wheel for him. I had two really close friends that lived on my street, and some friends at school, but I spent most of my time bothering my brother and his friends. Eric had muscular dystrophy. He was in a wheelchair at age 13. It really never stopped him, though, from doing what he wanted to do. I mean, he went to high school. He had a job. I mean, the one summer we passed out flyers so he could fix electronics. He went to CVCC to learn how to build computers and stuff. I mean, he was a really smart kid. Um, and I mean, like sports wise, I mean, we would find different ways to get Eric involved. He would be the pitcher for home run derby. We would play hockey and we would put him in pads and he'd be the goalie. We had all these manual wheelchairs. Like we had like four manual wheelchairs at one time, and we would play wheelchair basketball at the house. We shared a room for most of our lives. And I helped him with some things, and he helped me with some others, but we were always together. The summer after freshman year was a big turning point, though, because I was used to hanging out with my big brother and most of his friends, and a lot of those friends were going away to college and getting jobs and getting married, spending more time with girls, and stuff like that. Uh, so now Eric was hanging out with me and my friends, which, I mean, Eric had such a personality. Saying me and my friends really isn't fair because I think everyone I brought around Eric was just as much his friend as mine. That same summer, I got a job working at the apartments across from Marymount Hospital in Garfield Heights. I mean, I was basically a 15-year-old maintenance man. It was pretty crazy looking back on it because they would have you, I'd be tarring a roof one day, cutting the grass another day, and doing drywall another day, which I suck at drywall. I still suck at drywall. But a lot of stuff where, you're learning on the job, and it was really good for me, but I just laugh because I can't believe they had a kid doing that stuff at such a young age. But I was making $14 an hour, which it was under the table. I was working like 40 hours a week. It was great money. So that combined with kind of a lack of supervision, it allowed for a pretty crazy summer. We actually drank for the first time. I believe it was freshman year, and we had it all planned out. My friend's parents were going to a wedding, and we had all drank before, but never really got together and drank. And it was just me, a friend of mine from school, and his friend. And so I had to go around and collect the money from people. My friend was playing in a basketball game, and his friend was watching him in the stands. So I had to go get the money from him at the game. And I have no idea how much money it was, but I remember going home and waking my brother Eric up to go walk to Woodward Beverage in Garfield Heights with me. And all we got, I want to say it was just a 12-pack of Smirnoff Ice. And I remember getting home. Eric was all pissed at me because I woke him up. It was kind of early. It was on a Saturday morning. And then I had to bag it all up. And I remember asking Eric, like, do you want to go? He's like, dude, I just woke up, And so he didn't want to go. But my friend and his friend were going to come and meet me right after the basketball game. And I remember, it didn't take much, I want to say we had maybe 2 Smirnoffs each, and I remember we were all crawling to the Papa John's pizza box by the time it got delivered. Anyways, that's just a side note, I guess, on the first time I ever drank. So making $14 an hour at, 15 years old, I was paid weekly, so we went to quite a few concerts that summer. We went to Kid Rock at Tower City Amphitheater. We went to Nickelback and Jerry Cantrell at Nautica, and we went to Creed at the time it was Gund Arena. And usually we would all pile on a bus and go down there, But for Creed, we had found out that since it was on a Sunday, the bus wasn't working, back then. So we had to go. My friends caught a ride with, I think it was one of their parents, and me and Eric went home, and I got my rollerblades, and I hung on the back of his wheelchair, and we rollerbladed to Gund Arena from Garfield Heights. It was a trip. I still can remember doing that. And it was such a story too, honestly. Getting home, his batteries were low. I remember, "What's This Life For" playing by Creed, and the confetti's pouring down, and it's the last song, and you could just tell it's the last song. And Eric looked up at me, and he's like, "How the hell are we getting home?" And I just looked at him like, "I don't know, man." And we ended up calling my dad, and everything was fine. But it's a great memory that I have. At the beginning of August in 2002, Eric had started getting sick. We had been to the doctors 2 or 3 times, and it was really frustrating for him because they kept not being able to find anything really. And he knew he was sick. He knew how he felt, and it would be on and off from there. One day he'd wake up and he'd feel fine, and the next day he would just feel like crap. And one night, my friend Brad had called me asking me if I wanted to come down and play cards. We would play spades and five card poker for quite a bit of money actually back in the day. I mean, we were crazy. I don't know. We thought we were. I don't know what we thought we were, but we gambled way too much for 15-year-old kids. So I said, yeah, I'll be down in a little bit. And I went into my brother Eric's room and asked him, like, hey, Brad wants to play cards. You want to come? I'm not even sure who was going to be there that night, but I'm sure it was just more. It was more than just me and Brad. And he said no. He said no. I feel like shit. How about you stay and finish watching this movie with me? And the movie that was on, it was Tombstone with Kurt Russell and Val Kilmer. It was on AMC, I believe, and we sat there and we started watching it. And after a little while, Eric had this bucket that he was spitting into because he just didn't feel good, and then he started coughing, and he started coughing up this like black and red. Um, I don't know what it was, but like gunk, I guess I'll call it. And when he showed me, we both agreed that it was, we probably needed to get to the emergency room. So I helped him into his chair, and we went out to the dining room, and we told my dad that we were going to walk to Marymount emergency room, which he agreed, and we were off. Eric, spitting up black and red gunk on, every 50 feet or so. And that was a long walk, but he was in good spirits. I remember it was earlier in the day. I had eaten his half of a Subway sandwich, and he was pissed at me. And he had obviously kind of finally forgave me for that, so I was happy. And he started talking about how he just wanted to get this figured out, and how he needed to call his friend. He had a friend from high school that he was kind of ignoring because he really just didn't feel good, and he felt bad about just ignoring him for like the past like month or two. So he was gonna call him and make that right, once he got better. And as we're walking into Marymount ER, he tells me, he said, "Hey, if you can stay with me, please stay with me." And we get there, we do what we have to do, check in, and we go sit in the waiting room. And a little bit after we sat down, my dad walks in, and my dad says, "Hey, I'll be back. I'm gonna run him home. He's got 2 days in the morning." And me and Eric both didn't say anything, and I just went and got in the truck with my dad, and he took me home. And it wouldn't be till I couldn't give you a time. It could have been 2 in the morning. It could have been 5 in the morning. But my dad would wake me up sitting on my bed upstairs and say there were complications at the hospital. Eric's gone. So I think one thing that I was guilty of for way too long was focusing on the bad, in a situation, like only seeing the bad, and just why me, and poor me, and all that crap. Like you're some kind of victim, or the universe is out to get you. And when you look back on certain situations, even the terrible ones, you can find light there. Even the worst ones. I mean, when Eric died, we had such a outpouring of support, and I mean, just people were people wouldn't even call. I mean, they would just come over. Um, I mean, we had so much support. He had so many people there for him. I had so many people there for me. But a lot of people didn't still really know how to handle it. and I'm not sure if that's just what they did when somebody would die, but I mean, we got drunk. We got just drunk. We had this tent that connected our neighbor's yard and our yard. It ran through both yards. We had a party there, um, like a few months before Eric passed. I'm not sure what the party was for, but that tent became our, you know, drunken crying sanctuary for the next 3 weeks. And you know, nobody knows. It's never a good time to deal with death, especially the death of your 22-year-old brother. Um, but that's always going to be hard. Um, and even the adults back in this situation just handled it terribly. I mean, we all handled it terribly. Any role model that I had back then was doing the same thing that I was. I mean, we all just got drunk and slept it off and woke up the next morning to do it all over again. And that kind of became, a common theme when somebody would die, for me at least. For me and my friends, this went on for weeks. But after only about a week, my friends started going back to football and going to school, and it took me longer than that. I mean, I started going to school after maybe like two weeks, and but I still wasn't going to football, and you know, I remember being kind of pissed that my friends abandoned me, which is so shitty to say, but because they didn't abandon me. They had to get on with their lives, and I was not. I just wasn't. I was gonna stay there and drink and talk about Eric for the rest of my life. It seemed like. But once I finally got back to school, one of my JV football coaches, Mr. Nowak, came up to me and he said, you know, if you show up to the game on Saturday, you're starting. I'm not gonna let something like this, stop you from starting. And he gave me a big hug, and I showed up on Saturday, and he really pulled me out of just a dark place. Football and my friends, and just that whole football team that year really, 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 really helped me. You're listening to Beyond Dope. New episodes are available every Friday, 5 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. For questions, comments, or just to reach out, email beyonddopepodcast@gmail.com. Okay, so real quick, one of the things that has changed a lot for me is just it's like I realize how big of an asshole I was in active addiction. When you can take those rose colored glasses off and really see everything for what it truly is, it's very eye opening. I mean, and it could all be avoided just with really with talking to each other and having honest conversations. But we don't want to do that, or we're too busy to do that. And I mean, that goes on both sides. To the addict, you don't want to sit down and admit your faults to everyone who cares about you and tell them how bad it is. You just want to keep up that lie and try to go to work and whatever else you're doing. And to the family of that addict, you have things going on too. And how many times, I know so many people that wish that they just took the time to sit down and have that conversation, because they didn't. I mean, granted, I know people that sat down and had that conversation and it did no good anyways, but we don't try. There's not enough effort on either side. We're very selfish beings. We always think we're right. We always think the other person's wrong. You know, we have to. You know, you have to be able to look yourself in the mirror at the end of the night and think that you're the right one. You know, you're the one that's doing things right. They're not doing things right, and I don't know why that is. I mean, that it sucks. It really sucks. There's so much guilt and shame associated with addiction that it seems like this mountain that you just can't climb. You don't know how to start. You don't know. You don't know, so you just don't do it. And and the only way to do it is to talk to each other, to have these conversations. I mean, it's 2025, and this huge stigma is still real. It's still there, you know, where we make, you know, we just make these choices where we just don't stop because we're just terrible human beings. You know, that's got to be it, right? And that's not it. That's not it. It's so many things rolled into one. Is there some choices made? Yes. At the beginning, there are some choices made, and they're terrible choices. Do we ever think that they're going to lead to where they lead? No. No, nobody wants this. I'm going to leave it right there for now. That's going to be my parting information to you, is to just, or my parting wisdom to you will be just keep talking. Keep talking to each other. If you have a loved one suffering with addiction, reach out to them. Reach out to them until it hurts, because they don't have anybody else, maybe. And if you need resources, they're available. They're everywhere in the Cleveland, Akron area. Just send an email, beyonddopepodcast@gmail.com, and we'll help you out. Until next time, put one foot in front of the other, one day at a time. Thanks, guys.